Right now, a dome of high pressure is sitting over the middle and eastern United States, pressing down like a lid on a pot. It reached its peak on the 4th of July 2026, when Atlantic City, New Jersey climbed to 106 degrees. More than 160 million people were under heat alerts as the holiday weekend arrived. If this report helps you make sense of it, you can subscribe and follow along. The heat you feel in the afternoon is the part everyone talks about. The nights are the part that gets missed. Through this heat wave, the air has barely cooled after dark, and in many cities the temperature never fell below 80 degrees. That is what turns a hot spell into a dangerous one. The body needs the cool of night to recover, and this time the cool never came. This report walks through the whole event in order: how the dome formed, why the days broke records, and why the quiet, warm nights are the part that does the real harm. In the last week of June, the weather over the central United States simply stopped moving. Day after day, the sky held the same look: high, hazy, and still. That stillness was the first sign of what was coming. A large mass of high pressure had built up high in the atmosphere and settled into place. Forecasters call this kind of pattern a heat dome. It works like a lid pressed down over a pot. Warm air that would normally rise and drift away gets trapped underneath and pushed back down toward the ground. The longer the lid sits, the hotter the air below it turns. This dome did not pass through in an afternoon. It parked. At its widest, it stretched across more than 2/3 of the lower 48 states. From the Great Plains to the Mississippi Valley, across the southeast and up the east coast, the same heavy air sat and baked. By the start of the holiday week, more than 160 million people were living under some form of heat alert. That is close to half the country at once. The National Weather Service posted warnings and advisories across state after state. In many places, the wording climbed into the highest categories the agency uses. The heat rose through the week and peaked over the long weekend. On the 4th, Atlantic City, New Jersey reached 106 degrees. For a shore town that usually leans on an ocean breeze, that is a startling number. Cities that rarely touch triple digits touched them for days in a row. Philadelphia and Washington ran in the low 100s. Boston and New York were not far behind. The story most people followed was the daytime number. It is the one on the phone screen and the one the anchor reads at the top of the hour. It is easy to picture and easy to talk about, and it was, on its own, a serious stretch of heat. But a heat dome does something else that gets far less notice. It does not only heat the afternoon, it heats the whole column of air top to bottom, and it holds that heat through the night. When the sun goes down, the ground should give its warmth back to the sky and cool off. Under a strong dome, that release slows to almost nothing. The heat has nowhere to go. So the nights during this event did not cool. In much of the affected region, the temperature never dropped below the high 70s after dark. In the densest cities, it stayed near or above 80 degrees straight through until morning. People woke up already hot, in homes that had not had a chance to shed the day. That is the quiet center of this whole story. The afternoon high grabs the attention, but the overnight low is where the real harm gathers. A body can take a very hot day if the night that follows lets it recover. Take that recovery away, night after night, and the danger climbs fast. Early signs of that danger showed up right away. On the 2nd day of July, a 68-year-old man died after trimming bushes in Bethel Township, Pennsylvania, where the temperature had pushed past 100 degrees. By the holiday itself, officials across several states counted at least 25 deaths tied to the heat. That number was a running total, not a final one, and heat totals almost always rise later. Public services felt the strain too. Power use surged as air conditioners ran flat out. In some areas, the grid buckled and hundreds of thousands of homes lost electricity. Transit lines slowed because steel rail expands and can warp in extreme heat, and crews cut train speeds to stay safe. Summer camps and outdoor events were called off across the Midwest and the East. None of this was random. It all traced back to the one thing sitting overhead: a dome of high pressure, locked in place, refusing to move, warming the days to records and keeping the nights from ever letting go. This report follows that single event from start to finish. First the setup, and the science of why the air got so hot. Then the part that matters most and gets the least attention, the nights that would not cool, and finally what it means for the people underneath it, this summer and beyond. To understand why this dome held on the way it did, it helps to look closely at what a heat dome actually is, and why once one settles in, it can be so hard to shift. A heat dome is a ridge of high pressure that stalls high in the atmosphere and stays put. That is the plain version. To see why it matters, it helps to picture the air above us as always in motion, always trying to balance itself out. Warm air rises, cool air sinks. Weather systems drift from west to east, one after another, and that steady parade is what keeps most days from getting stuck. A strong ridge of high pressure interrupts the parade. Think of it as a boulder dropped into a stream. The water that was flowing straight now has to bend and go around it. In the atmosphere, the fast river of air we call the jet stream does the same thing. It buckles up and over the ridge, then dips back down on the far side. As long as that big bend holds, the ridge underneath it barely moves. Under the ridge, the air sinks. This is the part that makes the heat. When air sinks, the growing pressure squeezes it, and squeezed air warms up. It is the same reason a bicycle pump gets warm when you push down hard. The whole column of air below the dome gets compressed and heated from the top down, not just warmed by the sun at the surface. Sinking air also dries the sky and clears the clouds. That leaves the sun with a straight shot at the ground all day long, so you get two heat sources stacked together. The sinking air warming from above, and the clear sky letting full sunlight bake the surface. Each one feeds the other. There is a third piece, and it is the one that ties this whole report together. A dome does not clock out at sunset. During the day, the ground and the pavement and the rooftops all soak up heat. On a normal night, they radiate that stored heat back up to the sky, and the surface cools. A heat dome slows that release. The warm, sinking air acts like a blanket that traps the heat near the ground. So the surface holds on to much of what it gathered during the day, and the night stays hot. That is why a dome is so different from a single scorching afternoon. A one-day spike is uncomfortable, but the night after it usually brings relief, and the body resets. A dome removes the reset. It heats the day, holds the night, and then does the same thing again tomorrow, and the day after that. Each cycle starts from a warmer floor than the last, because the ground never fully cooled overnight. This dome was especially stubborn. The big bend in the jet stream locked into a shape that kept the ridge anchored over the same part of the country for days. Forecasters watching it described a blocking pattern, which is exactly what it sounds like. The normal flow was blocked, and nothing could nudge the dome along. The high humidity made everything worse. A lot of moisture had pooled into the trapped air mass, especially across the south and up the east coast. Water in the air holds heat well, so the humidity kept nights from cooling even more than a dry dome would. It also raised what the heat actually felt like on the skin, which is a subject worth its own chapter later on. You can measure a dome in a rough way by how tall it is. Meteorologists look at the height of a certain pressure level in the atmosphere, and during this event that height reached values rarely seen over the eastern United States. In plain terms, the dome was both very strong and very deep. That combination is what pushed so many cities past their records and kept the overnight lows so high. None of this is new weather. Heat domes have always formed in summer. What has changed is the starting point. The whole planet is warmer than it used to be, so when a dome sets up now, it builds on ground that is already hotter. A pattern that once brought a hot week now brings a dangerous one. With the dome explained, the next step is to look at the numbers it produced during the day. The records it broke tell you how far this event reached, and they set the stage for the part that came after dark. Records are just numbers until you line them up, and this heat wave lined up a lot of them. Over 2 days at the end of the week, dozens of locations tied or broke their daily high temperature marks. On one afternoon, more than 20 spots set new records. The next day, more than a dozen more fell. The dome was not touching one city hard. It was touching a whole third of the country at once. The peak reading came from the shore. Atlantic City, New Jersey hit 106 degrees. That kind of number belongs to the desert southwest, not the New Jersey coast, and seeing it there tells you how far the dome had reached and how firmly it held. The big cities of the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic ran hot for days. Philadelphia climbed to around 100 degrees and stayed near there. Washington did the same. For several major metro areas, the holiday weekend brought a third straight day of triple-digit heat. Baltimore, New York, and much of the corridor between them sat in the upper 90s and low hundreds. The middle of the country got the first wave. The warmest air spread across the central states early in the week, then slid east as the dome shifted its weight. So the Great Plains and the Mississippi Valley baked first, and the East Coast took the worst of it a few days later. The raw air temperature was only half the picture. The other half was how it felt, and that is measured by the heat index. Across the eastern two-thirds of the country, the heat index climbed above 100 degrees. In many places it passed 110. In the most humid pockets it edged toward 115. That is the number that matters to the human body, and it was punishing. To picture how wide this was, hold the map in your mind. Texas up through the southeast to the Atlantic saw the highest heat index values, because that is where the most moisture had gathered. The southwestern states ran into the mid to upper hundreds on the thermometer, which for them is severe but more familiar. The northern plains and upper Midwest stayed cooler, in the upper 80s and low 90s, on the northern edge of the dome. The timing made it harder. This was a holiday weekend built around being outside. Parades, cookouts, fireworks, and long days at the beach or the ball field. On top of that, cities were hosting large gatherings for the country's 250th anniversary and for World Cup soccer matches. Huge crowds were planning to stand outdoors for hours in the worst of it. The heat pushed into those plans right away. Outdoor events were cancelled or cut short. Some fireworks shows were scaled back or scrapped, partly for the heat, and partly for the storm threat the heat helped create. Cities opened cooling centres and asked people to check on older neighbours and to slow down. Then came the air. An oppressive dome sitting still lets pollutants build up near the ground, and air quality alerts went out across the eastern states. Fireworks made it worse. The smoke from formal shows and backyard celebrations can push air quality into unhealthy ranges, sometimes rivaling what a wildfire produces, and in some cities the haze does not clear until the next day. So millions faced a double load, the heat and the dirty air together. Now hold all these daytime numbers in mind, because here is the turn. Every figure so far is an afternoon figure. The record highs, the heat index, the triple-digit streaks. They are real, and they are dangerous. But they are also the part the forecast led with and the part people watched. The number that did the quiet damage was not on that list. It was the overnight low. While the country tracked how high the afternoon climbed, the more telling figure was how little the night came down. Through this whole event, in city after city, the temperature after dark refused to fall. That is where the report turns next, away from the peak of the day and toward the floor of the night, which is where a heat wave stops being uncomfortable and starts being deadly. Here is the figure that most reports skipped. Through the worst of this heat wave, the overnight low in the Baltimore and Washington region, and across southeastern Pennsylvania, stayed in the low 80s. Not the high, the low. The coolest the air got in the dead of night was around 80 degrees. Across a much wider area the pattern held. The National Weather Service noted that overnight lows were generally staying in the 70s, which gave people little relief before the next hot day began. In the densest city cores the low stalled near or above 80. That is the reading that turns a heatwave dangerous, and it is the one almost nobody plans around. To feel why it matters, think about a normal summer hot spell. The afternoon is brutal, but around sunset the air starts to slide down. By the middle of the night it might reach the 60s. That drop is the body's window. It is when a house without strong cooling finally lets go of its heat, when a fan in the window actually helps, when a person can sleep and let the strain of the day drain away. A heat dome closes that window. The air after dark barely moves off its daytime warmth, so the house never resets. The bedroom that hit 90 in the afternoon is still near 80 at 3 in the morning, and the person inside starts the next day already behind, with no recovery banked. Meteorologists who watched this event said it plainly. One from AccuWeather pointed out that the trend in these big events has been for overnight lows to run warmer and warmer, especially during major heat waves. The atmosphere is holding more heat at night than it used to. When the night starts from a warmer floor, the next day's climb begins higher, and the whole stack ratchets up. Humidity drove the point home. The air over the eastern states was thick with moisture, and moist air cools slowly after sunset. Water vapor traps heat, so a humid night sheds far less warmth than a dry one. That is a large part of why these particular nights stayed so high. The same moisture that pushed the daytime heat index toward 110 also kept the two in the morning reading pinned up near 80. There is a cruel twist buried in that humidity. You might expect a passing afternoon thunderstorm to bring relief. Sometimes it does the opposite. A storm can dump rain and then leave the air even more saturated behind it, so the night that follows feels worse, not better. The one thing that looks like it should help can make the trap tighter. This is the consequence the title points to, not the height of the afternoon which everyone braces for, but the floor of the night, which few people even check. A hot day is a headline. A hot night is the thing that quietly stacks up in hospital numbers a week later, and those numbers did climb. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported extremely high rates of heat-related emergency room visits during this stretch. That phrase, extremely high, is not one the agency uses lightly. It reflects a body of cases building across the region, many of them not from a single terrible afternoon, but from days of heat with no cool night to break the strain. The people showing up were not only the ones you might guess. Some were outdoor workers and athletes, of course, but emergency doctors noted that many were ordinary people simply going about their lives, older adults especially, whose homes never cooled enough for their bodies to keep up. That is the shape of the danger. It is cumulative. It is patient. It does not announce itself with one dramatic number. It builds across a run of nights that each fall a little short of the relief a body needs. So the real question of this heatwave is not how hot the afternoon got. It is what happened to people who spent night after night in air that would not cool. To answer that, we have to look at the body itself, and at why the dark, cool part of the day matters so much to keeping a person alive. The human body runs a little furnace all the time. Every beat of the heart, every breath, every thought gives off heat. To stay healthy, the body has to shed that heat as fast as it makes it, and keep its core temperature close to 98.6 degrees. When the outside world makes that hard, the body has to work to keep up. It has two main tools. The first is blood flow. When you get hot, the heart pumps more blood toward the skin, where it can release heat into the air. You can see this when a face turns red on a hot day. That flushed look is the body moving warmth outward. It costs effort, because the heart has to push harder and faster to do it. The second tool is sweat. As sweat evaporates off the skin, it carries heat away with it. This is the body's most powerful cooling trick, and on a dry day it works beautifully. A person can shed a lot of heat through evaporation alone. Both tools depend on one thing. The outside air has to be able to accept the heat you're trying to give it. If the air is cooler than your skin, heat flows out easily. If the air is nearly as hot as your body, there is nowhere for the heat to go. And if the air is thick with moisture, sweat cannot evaporate, so that tool jams too. This is why a hot, humid night is so hard on a person. Both of the body's cooling methods lose their grip at once. Now bring in the night. On a normal day, the body spends the hot afternoon working hard to stay cool, running the heart faster and sweating steadily. It is, in a real sense, exerting itself even while sitting still. Then night comes, the air cools, and the body finally gets to ease off. The heart slows, the core temperature settles, the system recovers and readies itself for the next day. That nightly recovery is not a luxury. It is the whole reason a body can take repeated hot days. One doctor who runs an emergency department put it in a way that sticks. She compared it to a marathon runner being asked to run race after race on back-to-back days with no rest in between. A single race is survivable. The same race every day, with no recovery, breaks the runner down. Heat works the same way on the body. When the night refuses to cool, the recovery never happens. The heart keeps working through the dark hours. The core temperature never fully settles. The person wakes already warm, already a little behind, and then faces another full day of heat starting from that deficit. Do this for 3, 4, 5 nights in a row, and the strain compounds. The heart takes the heaviest load. Pushing all that blood to the skin, hour after hour, day and night, is real work for the cardiovascular system. That is why heat waves drive up not only heat stroke, but heart attacks and strokes as well. For a person whose heart is already weak, a long stretch of hot nights can be the thing that tips them over. The signs of trouble build in stages. First comes heat exhaustion, from long exposure to high temperatures. The skin goes clammy, the pulse races, a person feels weak, dizzy, or sick to the stomach. This is the body warning that it is losing the fight. If the person cools down and drinks water, they usually recover. If they do not, it can progress to heat stroke, which is a true emergency. The body's cooling system fails outright. The core temperature climbs to dangerous levels. Confusion sets in, the skin may go hot and dry, and organs begin to suffer. Without fast cooling and medical help, heat stroke can kill, and it can do so quickly. The warm night is what carries a person from the mild end of that scale toward the deadly end. Not in one leap, but a little each day, as the missed recovery adds up. That is why the overnight low is the number to watch, and it is why the next question matters so much. If one hot night is hard, what does a run of them do? The answer is in how the danger stacks day after day, which is where we turn now. A single hot day rarely kills a healthy person. The danger of this heat wave was not any one afternoon. It was the run of them, stacked back to back, with warm nights wedged in between that gave no one a chance to catch up. Heat is a cumulative hazard. It works by addition. Picture the strain as water filling a bucket. On an ordinary hot day, the heat pours some water in during the afternoon. Then the cool night tips the bucket and drains most of it out. You start the next morning with the bucket nearly empty. You can do that many days in a row without trouble, because each night resets you. Now take away the drain. Under this dome, the warm nights meant the bucket barely emptied. Each hot day added more water. Each hot night left most of it sitting there. By the 3rd or 4th day, the bucket was near the top, and it took only a little more to spill. That spill is a trip to the emergency room, or worse. This is why the timing of heat deaths often lags the peak of a heat wave. The worst afternoon is not always the deadliest one. The deadliest stretch tends to come a few days in, once the strain has piled up and the most vulnerable bodies have run out of reserve. The heat that has been quietly accumulating finally overwhelms them. You could see the pattern in this event. Several major cities reached a 3rd consecutive day of triple-digit heat over the holiday weekend. It was not the first day that emptied the hospitals of open beds. It was the accumulation, day upon day, with the nights offering no relief. The emergency room director's marathon comparison fits exactly here. It was the multiple races with no rest that did the damage, not any single race. The people most exposed to this stacking are the ones with the least room to spare. An older adult whose heart no longer pumps as strongly starts each day with a smaller reserve. A run of hot nights drains it faster than a younger body's. Someone with lung disease, kidney disease, or diabetes has a system already under load, so the added strain of the heat pushes them over sooner. There is also a trap in how the danger feels from the inside. The strain of accumulated heat can dull a person's judgment. As the body overheats over several days, thinking gets foggy. A person may not notice how much trouble they are in. They may not feel thirsty even when badly dehydrated. So the very condition that is hurting them also makes them less able to recognize it and act. This is part of why heat quietly claims people in their own homes. That is one of the hardest facts about heat as a hazard. Many of its victims die indoors, alone, in homes that never cooled. Not on a dramatic afternoon in the sun, but over a series of nights, in a bedroom that stayed near 80 degrees, in a body that slowly lost the ability to keep up. The event looks calm from the outside. There is no wind, no water, no visible wreckage. The harm happens quietly, over days, behind closed doors. The stacking also explains why a heatwave's true cost is almost never clear while it's happening. During the event, officials can count the obvious cases: the person who collapsed outdoors, the worker who went down on the job. By the holiday, that running count across several states had reached at least 25, but the fuller toll, the older adults who died at home over a run of hot nights, only becomes visible later, when health agencies compare the total number of deaths during the heat wave to what a normal week would bring. So the shape of the danger is now clear. Heat harms by adding up day after day, and the warm nights are what keep the total from ever resetting. A run of hot days with cool nights is tiring. A run of hot days with hot nights is dangerous. This event was the second kind. There is one more piece that made the stacking worse this time, and it deserves a close look. The moisture in the air. Humidity is what pushed the nights so high and kept the bodies cooling from working, and it is the subject of the next chapter. Two numbers describe a hot day. There is the temperature, which the thermometer reads, and there is what it feels like, which the body reads. Those two can be far apart, and the gap between them is humidity. During this heat wave, that gap was where much of the danger lived. The measure that captures the felt heat is called the heat index. It combines the air temperature with the amount of moisture in the air to estimate how hot the conditions actually are on human skin. During this event, air temperatures in the low 100s came paired with heat index values around 110, and in the most humid spots closer to 115. The body was not fighting 100 degrees, it was fighting 110. To see why moisture matters so much, go back to sweat. The body's best cooling tool is evaporation. Sweat forms on the skin, then evaporates, and as it turns from liquid to vapor, it pulls heat away. That process needs somewhere for the moisture to go. It needs air that can still absorb water. When the air is already thick with moisture, it cannot take much more. The sweat sits on the skin instead of evaporating. You feel damp and sticky and no cooler for it. The body keeps producing sweat, losing fluid and salt, but getting little of the cooling that sweat is supposed to deliver. As one heat expert put it, the water content in the air is so high that a person simply cannot evaporate the sweat off their skin. The main cooling system stalls. This is the difference between a dry heat and a wet one. In the dry southwest, 105 degrees is dangerous, but the low humidity lets sweat evaporate freely, so the body has a working defense. In the humid east, 95 degrees with heavy moisture can be harder on the body because the defense is jammed. This heat wave carried a lot of moisture across the south and up the coast, which is exactly why those regions saw the highest heat index values. Humidity is also the key to the warm nights, which brings the humidity story back to the heart of this report. Water vapor in the air holds heat. A humid air mass cools slowly after sunset, because the moisture traps the day's warmth and releases it grudgingly. A dry desert night can drop 30 or 40 degrees after dark. A humid summer night in the east barely falls at all, so the same moisture that stalled the body's sweat during the day was the reason the night never gave it a break. That combination, high heat index by day and a humid floor by night, is close to the worst case for the human body. The afternoon disables sweat when a person needs it most. The night refuses to cool when the body is desperate for recovery. There is no good part of the 24 hours. The strain runs around the clock. There is a limit to all of this that scientists watch closely. It is measured by something called the wet bulb temperature, which is essentially the lowest temperature you can reach by evaporating water into the air. When the wet bulb value climbs high enough, sweat cannot cool the body at all, no matter how fit or careful a person is. Reach that point, and even a healthy adult in the shade with water is in danger. This heat wave did not push most areas to that extreme, and it is important to say that plainly. But it ran hot and humid enough to make the ordinary defences far weaker than usual, which is danger enough. The felt heat also explains why the guidance during the event leaned so hard on staying out of it. When the heat index passes 105, the standard advice is to limit time outside, take frequent breaks in shade or air conditioning, and drink water often. Those steps are not fussy. They are built around the simple fact that the body's own cooling cannot be trusted to keep up in that kind of air. So humidity did double duty in this heat wave. It made the days feel hotter than the thermometer said, and it kept the nights from cooling the way a body needs. Both effects point at the same group of people, the ones whose bodies were least able to absorb the strain. That group is the subject of the next chapter, and it is larger than most people think. Heat does not fall evenly on everyone. The same hot night that a healthy young adult sleeps through can be the thing that sends an older neighbour to the hospital. Understanding who is most at risk is the difference between a heat wave that is tracked and one that is survived. During this event, the pattern of risk was well known, and it held true again. Older adults sit at the top of the list. As the body ages, it sheds heat less efficiently. The heart may not pump as strongly, so it struggles to move blood to the skin. Sweating can lessen with age, which weakens the main cooling tool. The sense of thirst also fades, so an older person may be badly dehydrated without feeling it. Add a medication that affects fluid balance or heart rate, which many older adults take, and the body's defences drop further. A run of hot nights strains this group hardest, because they have the least reserve to spend. Very young children are also vulnerable, though for different reasons. A small body heats up faster than a large one, because it has more surface area for its size. Infants cannot tell anyone they are overheating, cannot get themselves to cooler air, and cannot pour their own glass of water. They depend entirely on the adults around them to notice and act. People with chronic illness face raised risk across the board. Heart disease means the extra pumping demand of heat lands on an organ already struggling. Lung disease makes the laboured breathing of a hot, polluted day harder. Kidney disease affects how the body handles fluid and salt, which heat throws out of balance. Diabetes can interfere with sweating and with the sense of thirst. Each condition removes one of the body's tools for coping. Emergency doctors during this heat wave specifically named older adults, young children, pregnant people, and those with heart, lung, kidney, and diabetic conditions as the ones most at risk. Then there is a group defined not by their bodies, but by their circumstances. People living in poverty are more exposed to heat, and the reasons are practical. Their homes are often built of heat-trapping materials like concrete, with little insulation and no easy way to cool down. They may not be able to afford to run air conditioning even if they have it, or may not have it at all. They may live in the parts of a city that hold heat the worst. The heat finds the people with the fewest resources to escape it. Outdoor workers carry a heavy load too. Construction crews, farm workers, roofers, delivery drivers, and anyone who spends long hours in the sun cannot simply step inside when the heat index hits 110. Their work demands physical effort, which generates its own body heat on top of the weather. For many, missing a day means missing pay. So they push through conditions that the guidance says to avoid, and they turn up in the injury and death counts because of it. One of the most important lessons from this heat wave is who was actually showing up sick, and it upended a common assumption. The image many people hold of a heat victim is an athlete collapsing on a field or a labourer going down on a job site. Those cases are real, but the emergency room director who treated patients during this event said that many of the people she saw were simply going about their daily lives, not exercising, not working outdoors, just existing in homes and neighbourhoods that never cooled enough. That fact reframes the whole risk. It means you do not have to do anything dangerous to be in danger. You can be an older person sitting quietly in your own living room, and if that room stays near 80 degrees for 5 nights running, the heat can still reach you. The threat is passive. It comes to people where they are. This is why the guidance during heat waves puts such weight on checking on others. The people most at risk are often the least able to ask for help. An older adult living alone, a neighbour with a weak heart, a family without working air conditioning. A knock on the door and a few minutes of attention can catch trouble early, before heat exhaustion tips into something worse. All of these risks sharpen after dark, when the missed recovery of a warm night does its work. And whether a person gets that recovery often comes down to one thing above all others: whether they have a way to cool their home at night. That single divide between those who can cool down and those who cannot is the subject of the next chapter. More than anything else, one thing decides whether a person makes it through a run of hot nights in good shape: whether they can cool the place where they sleep. Air conditioning is not a comfort during a heat wave like this one. It is closer to a medical necessity, and it is not shared equally. In the United States, most homes have air conditioning. By the most recent national count, close to 9 in 10 households have some form of it. That number is high, and it is the reason heat waves in America do not kill as many people as similar heat in places with less cooling. When the night will not cool the outdoor air, a working air conditioner cools the indoor air instead, and it hands the body the recovery the weather took away. But look under that national average and the picture splits. The homes without air conditioning are not spread randomly. They are concentrated among lower income households, among some communities of colour, and in older housing stock that was never fitted for it. So the cooling that protects most people is thinnest, exactly where the other risks are already highest. The families in heat-trapping homes, in the hottest neighbourhoods, with the least money, are also the ones least likely to have a working way to cool down. Even having an air conditioner is not the same as being able to use it. Running one through a long heat wave costs money, and for a household on a tight budget, a high summer electric bill is a real fear. Some people ration their cooling, setting the unit high or turning it off at night to save money, precisely when the warm night makes it most needed. Others avoid running it because they worry about the bill more than the heat, until the heat catches up with them. This is where the warm night turns a general inequality into a specific danger. In past summers, a home without air conditioning could still cool down at night by opening the windows. When the outdoor air dropped into the 60s after dark, a breeze through the house was enough to reset it. That old strategy is failing. A heat expert from Duke University made the point directly. When the overnight low will not fall, you can no longer rely on opening the windows to cool your body and your home. The night air is now part of the problem, not the solution. So the people who once got by without air conditioning are losing their fallback. The window that used to work does not work when the air outside is 80 degrees at midnight, and the households most likely to have depended on that method are the ones least able to afford the alternative. The warm night quietly takes away the free option and leaves only the expensive one. For people who rely on electricity to stay safe, the stakes are higher still. Someone using medical equipment at home, an oxygen machine or refrigerated medication, needs the power to stay on. A person who depends on air conditioning for a heart or lung condition is in real danger if it fails. During heat waves, utilities and health agencies urge these households to have a plan, because for them a power failure is not an inconvenience, it is an emergency. The cooling divide also shapes where people go when their own homes fail them. Cities open cooling centres during heat waves, public buildings with air conditioning where anyone can come to escape the heat for a few hours. Libraries, community centres, and shopping areas serve the same purpose informally. For people without cooling at home, these places are a lifeline, but they close at night, and the night is when the danger is worst. A person can spend the afternoon cool in a library and still go home to a bedroom that never drops below 80. That gap between the cool public day and the hot private night is one of the hardest problems in heat safety. It is also a reminder that the warm night consequence lands hardest on the people with the fewest ways to answer it. There is one more force that makes city nights especially cruel, and it works on everyone in the city at once regardless of income. It is the way a city itself stores heat and gives it back after dark. That effect, the urban heat island, is where we turn next. A city is hotter than the countryside around it, and the gap is widest at night. This is not a small effect. On a calm, clear night during a heat wave, a dense city centre can run several degrees warmer than the fields and forests just outside it. Scientists call this the urban heat island, and it is a big part of why the warm nights of this event hit city dwellers so hard. The cause is the material a city is built from. Concrete, asphalt, brick and stone are excellent at absorbing heat. All day long, under a blazing sun, the pavement and the buildings soak up warmth like a stone left in a fire. A dark road surface in full sun can grow far hotter than the air above it. The whole built environment becomes a giant heat sponge over the course of the day. At night, that stored heat comes back out. The concrete and asphalt release the warmth they gathered, radiating it slowly into the air through the evening and into the small hours. So while a grassy field cools quickly after sunset, giving its heat up to the open sky, a city block stays warm because its pavement and walls keep feeding heat back into the air. A researcher explained it simply. The building materials store heat during the day like a battery, then release it back at night, keeping temperatures elevated. That battery effect is why the urban overnight low stalls so high. The countryside might fall into the low 70s while the city core holds near 80. The city is not just failing to cool, It is actively being warmed from below by its own streets and buildings long after the sun has set. During this heat wave, that is exactly what kept the densest neighbourhoods pinned near or above 80 degrees through the night. Cities amplify the heat in other ways too. Tall buildings trap warm air in the canyons between them and block the breeze that might otherwise carry heat away. The waste heat from air conditioners, cars and machinery adds directly to the outdoor air, so the very act of cooling indoors dumps more heat outdoors, and cities have far less greenery than the countryside. Trees and plants cool the air by providing shade and by releasing water vapour, a natural air conditioning that a paved district largely lacks. The greenery gap is not evenly spread within a city, and this is where the heat island meets the cooling divide from the last chapter. Wealthier neighbourhoods tend to have more trees, more parks, and more shade. Lower-income neighbourhoods often have less canopy and more bare pavement, which means they run hotter day and night. So within a single city, the hottest blocks are frequently the ones where the people can least afford to cool their homes. The heat island stacks another layer onto an already uneven risk. This is why two people in the same heat wave can have completely different nights. One lives in a leafy suburb where the temperature falls into the low 70s after dark and a window fan is enough. The other lives in a dense, treeless city core where the pavement radiates heat until dawn and the bedroom never drops below 80. Same dome, same weather map, very different danger. The city itself decides part of the outcome. The heat island also means a city recovers more slowly when a heat wave finally breaks. When the dome at last moves on and the countryside cools overnight, the city's stored heat takes longer to bleed away. The battery has to discharge. So urban residents feel relief a little later than their rural neighbours, and a short break in the weather brings them less rest. None of this is fixed forever. Cities can cool themselves over time by planting trees, adding parks, using lighter-coloured roofs and pavement that reflects sunlight instead of soaking it up, and protecting the green spaces they have. Those changes are slow and they cost money, but they directly attack the battery effect that keeps city nights so warm. Later in this report we will look at what some cities are starting to do. For now, the point is that the warm night has a geography. It is worst in the dense, paved, treeless heart of a city, exactly where many of the most vulnerable people live. And when millions of those people reach for the one tool that can save them, the air conditioner, they all reach at once. That surge of demand lands on the power grid, and it lands hardest at the very hours the grid is least ready for it. That collision is the subject of the next chapter. When the night will not cool, everyone who can runs their air conditioning straight through it. Millions of units, in millions of homes, all pulling power at the same time. That surge is one of the least visible consequences of a warm night, and it puts the power grid under a kind of strain it was not built for. For most of its history, the electric grid has counted on the night as a time to breathe. Demand falls after the workday. People go to sleep, businesses close, and the load on the system drops. That nightly dip is when the grid rests, when operators run maintenance, and when supply catches up with demand. It is the grid's own version of the recovery a body gets from a cool night. A heat wave with warm nights erases that dip. As homes and businesses crank up air conditioning to stay cool, demand for electricity surges, and during this event it stayed high around the clock. The load that normally falls off after dark did not fall. Air conditioners kept running at 10 at night, at midnight, at 3 in the morning, because the heat never let up. The grid got no rest. On the same nights the people it serves got none either. The timing collides badly with how modern power is made. A growing share of electricity now comes from solar panels, which produce their peak power in the middle of the day when the sun is high. That is a good match for daytime cooling demand. But solar output fades in the evening and vanishes overnight. So just as the warm night keeps air conditioning demand high, the sun goes down and a large block of supply disappears. The grid has to make up that gap from other sources at the very moment demand refuses to fall. This squeeze is why heat waves are among the hardest tests a power system faces. The demand is high, sustained, and stretched into the hours when part of the supply is offline. Operators lean on backup power plants, on stored energy and batteries, and sometimes on asking neighbouring regions for help. Most of the time the system holds, but it holds with less margin than usual, and the margin gets thinner the longer the heat lasts. During this heat wave, the strain showed in real ways. Power use climbed to summer highs across the affected regions. In some areas, the system could not keep up, and hundreds of thousands of homes lost electricity. Some outages came from the sheer demand overwhelming local equipment. Transformers and lines that run hot under normal load can fail when pushed to the limit for days, especially when the night gives them no chance to cool either. The same principle that strains a human body strains the hardware. Equipment that never cools down wears out faster. Heat is hard on the physical grid in other ways too. Power lines sag when they heat up because the metal expands, and a sagging line carries electricity less efficiently and can trip offline if it droops too far. The efficiency of many power plants drops in extreme heat, so they produce a little less just when more is needed. Even the water used to cool some large plants can grow too warm to do its job well. The heat attacks supply and demand from both ends at once. There is a feedback loop hidden in all of this, and it is worth naming plainly. The hotter it gets, the more air conditioning people run. The more air conditioning runs, the more strain on the grid, and the more waste heat pumped into city air, which makes the outdoor night a touch warmer still. It is a small loop, but it points in the wrong direction. The tool that saves people indoors adds, in a minor way, to the heat outdoors. The people most exposed to a grid failure are the ones already most at risk from the heat. An older adult depending on air conditioning, a household running medical equipment, a family in a top-floor apartment with no cross breeze. For them, the lights going out on a hot night is not a nuisance. It removes the one thing keeping them safe. This is why utilities pre-position repair crews during heat waves, and why they treat summer outages as urgent. So the warm night reaches even into the machinery that is supposed to protect us from it. It keeps demand high when the grid expects a rest, drains supply as solar fades, and wears on equipment that never cools. Most of the time the system absorbs it, but when it does not, the failure lands at the worst possible moment. What happens when the power actually goes out in the middle of a heat wave is the subject of the next chapter. A power outage on a mild day is an inconvenience. A power outage in the middle of a heat wave is something else entirely. When the electricity fails, the air conditioning stops, and the one shelter people had from the heat disappears. During this event, that danger was not hypothetical. In places, the power did go out, and it went out while the heat was at its worst. The clearest example came from just across the northern border in Canada, where the same heat drove a chain of events that left tens of thousands of homes dark. The heat there built through the end of June, with Ontario and Quebec under warnings, and the felt temperature in Ottawa reaching well into the range where heat becomes dangerous. Then the heat did what intense heat often does. It fed violent storms. On the 1st of July, large thunderstorms broke out across Ontario and Quebec. They brought heavy rain, damaging wind, and widespread destruction. Ottawa recorded a remarkable amount of rain in a short time, enough to cause serious flooding. The storms knocked out power to a great many homes. Days later, tens of thousands of customers of the main Quebec utility were still without electricity, even as the heat pressed on. So people faced the heat wave with no way to cool their homes in the aftermath of a storm for days at a stretch. That sequence shows how the dangers compound. The heat alone was hard. The storms the heat helped create knocked out the power, and the lost power removed the cooling that people needed to survive the heat that was still there. Each problem made the next one worse. A person who could have ridden out the heat with a working air conditioner was suddenly exposed in the dark, with the temperature still high and no clear end in sight. Restoring power in these conditions is slow and dangerous work. Repair crews have to labour outdoors in the same extreme heat that caused the problem, which limits how long they can safely work and how fast they can move. Downed trees and flooded streets block access. The scale of the damage can outrun the number of available crews, so an outage that might be fixed in hours on a normal day can stretch into days during a heat wave, exactly when every hour without cooling matters more. The heat strained other public systems in the United States too, in ways that rippled through daily life. Public transit slowed. Steel rail expands in extreme heat and can bend out of shape, so transit agencies cut train speeds as a precaution, which meant delays for riders. Roads can suffer as well, with pavement buckling in the worst heat. The infrastructure that people rely on to get to work, to a cooling centre, or to a hospital was itself under stress. For a person caught in an outage during the heat, the standard guidance is simple and worth knowing before it is needed. If the home becomes too hot, the goal is to get to somewhere cooler. A cooling centre, a public building with power, or the home of a friend or relative whose electricity is on. Drink water steadily, stay on the lowest floor since heat rises, avoid using the oven or other heat-producing appliances, and check on neighbours who may not be able to move themselves, especially older adults living alone. The people who plan ahead fare best. Health agencies urge anyone who depends on electricity for medical needs to have a backup plan before the heat arrives. That might mean knowing the location of the nearest cooling centre, arranging to stay with someone who has power, or registering with the local utility so crews know to prioritise the address. When the outage comes in the middle of a heatwave, there is little time to improvise. This chapter closes the first half of the story, and it brings the two threads together. The warm night is the quiet consequence that stacks strain on the body. The grid strain and the outages are the loud consequence that can strip away the only defence against it. Both flow from the same dome, sitting still overhead, heating the days and holding the nights. The second half of this report widens the view. It looks at the storms the heat unleashed, at a deadly heat wave from the past that taught these same lessons, at the parallel heat gripping Europe in the same summer, and at why the nights themselves are warming faster than the days. All of it circles back to the one event overhead and to the single quiet fact at its centre, the heat that would not let go after dark. The same heat that pressed down on the country also loaded the sky for storms. This is not a coincidence. Heat and moisture are the raw fuel that thunderstorms run on, and a heat wave this humid packed the atmosphere with both. When that stored energy finally broke loose, it did so with force. The clearest case came from Canada, where the northern edge of the same heat had settled over Ontario and Quebec. The air there was hot and thick with moisture, exactly the conditions storms feed on. Warm, humid air near the ground wants to rise. When something gives it a push, it shoots upward fast, cooling as it climbs, and the moisture in it condenses into towering storm clouds. The more heat and humidity packed into the low air, the more violent the rising can be. The heat wave had loaded that gun for days. On the 1st of July, Canada Day, it went off. Large thunderstorms tore across Ontario and Quebec. Ottawa was hit especially hard, with a remarkable downpour that dropped about 4.5 inches of rain in a short span. That is a huge amount of water in a short time, far more than the ground or the storm drains could handle, and it caused widespread flooding. The storms brought damaging wind as well, tearing down trees and power lines across a wide area. The damage cascaded from there. Tens of thousands of homes lost power. Canada Day celebrations were cancelled, including fireworks, as the storms rolled through. And because the heat did not leave with the storms, people were left facing high temperatures with no electricity to cool their homes. Days later, tens of thousands of customers were still waiting for the lights to come back on. The United States saw its own version of the storm threat. Forecasters warned that the extreme heat and humidity would fuel thunderstorms across parts of the mid-Atlantic and northeast, heading into the holiday weekend. The same energy that pushed the afternoon heat index toward 110 was available to power storms if the atmosphere found a trigger. Severe storms did break out in places, leaving downed trees and power outages across New York and New Jersey. This is one of the harder faces of a heatwave to see coming. People brace for the heat itself, the high numbers and the still baking afternoons. Fewer expect that same heat to end in a violent storm. But the connection is direct. A hot, humid air mass is a reservoir of energy, and storms are one way that energy discharges. The calm, oppressive days and the sudden, destructive evening storms are two expressions of the same overloaded atmosphere. There is a cruel irony in how the relief arrives. People trapped under a heat dome often long for a thunderstorm, hoping the rain will break the heat and cool things down. Sometimes it does bring a brief drop, but often the storm passes quickly, and the air left behind is just as hot and even more saturated with moisture than before. The ground steams, the humidity climbs, The night that follows can feel worse than the one before it. The longed-for relief turns into another layer of the trap, and when the storm brings down the power, as it did in Canada, the aftermath is more dangerous than the storm itself. A person can shelter from wind and rain for an hour. Surviving days of heat with no cooling is a far harder thing, so the storm becomes not the end of the heat wave, but a twist that makes it deadlier, by stripping away the very defense people needed most. The storms also strain the crews and systems already stretched thin by the heat. The same repair workers who would restore power had to labour in the ongoing heat, amid flooded streets and downed trees, which slowed everything down. The infrastructure absorbed blow after blow, from the heat, then the storm, then the outage, then more heat. All of this traces back to the one event overhead. The dome heated the air and packed it with moisture. That loaded atmosphere then produced the storms. The storms cut the power, and the lost power removed the shelter people needed from the heat that started it all. It is a single chain, each link forged by the same source. The lessons of this heat wave, the warm nights, the vulnerable indoors, the failure of the old defences, are not new. A city learned every one of them at terrible cost 3 decades ago, in a heat wave that still shapes how experts think about heat today. That earlier disaster, and what it taught, is where we turn next. Everything this heat wave revealed about warm nights was learned once before, at a heavy price, in Chicago in the summer of 1995. That heat wave killed around 700 people in the span of about 5 days. It remains one of the deadliest weather events in modern American history, and it became the case that taught experts how heat actually kills. The weather itself was severe. In the middle of July, a powerful heat dome settled over the Midwest. Chicago's temperature reached 106 degrees, with a heat index that climbed even higher as humidity poured in. But the temperature alone did not explain the death toll. Other cities have hit similar highs without such loss. What made Chicago so deadly was the same thing at the centre of this report. The nights would not cool. Through that heat wave, the overnight lows in Chicago stayed extraordinarily high in the 80s. The city's concrete and brick, its dense neighbourhoods, and its urban heat island held the day's heat and radiated it back through the dark. So people got no recovery, night after night. The strain stacked, exactly as it does in the bucket that never drains, and by the 3rd and 4th days the most vulnerable bodies began to give out. The victims followed a pattern that has held true ever since. Most were older adults, many lived alone. A large share died indoors in apartments that had become ovens, in bodies that had slowly lost the ability to keep up over a run of hot nights. They were not struck down in the open sun. They faded quietly behind closed doors in the parts of the day no forecast highlighted. A sociologist who studied the disaster afterward found that the deaths were not spread evenly. They clustered among the isolated, the poor and the elderly, in neighbourhoods with less green space and weaker social ties. Some people kept their windows shut and their doors locked out of fear for their safety, sealing the heat in with them. Others had no one to check on them, no family or neighbour to notice they were in trouble. The heat found the people the city had already left most alone. That study reframed heat as more than a weather problem. It showed that who lives and who dies in a heat wave depends heavily on social conditions, on whether a person has air conditioning, on whether they live in a cool or a hot neighbourhood, on whether anyone will knock on their door. The weather sets the danger, but the shape of a community decides who it reaches. This is why so much heat guidance today centres on checking on vulnerable neighbours. That lesson was written in Chicago. The response at the time also revealed how easy it is to underestimate heat. Because heat kills quietly, without the drama of a flood or a tornado, the scale of the disaster was not clear while it was happening. The bodies overwhelmed the medical examiner's office before officials grasped what was unfolding. There was even public dispute over whether the deaths should count as heat deaths at all. That argument, over how to count the dead, foreshadowed a problem this report will return to in the next chapter. Chicago changed how cities prepare. In the years after, the city built a heat response plan. It set up systems to open cooling centres, to call and check on isolated residents during heat waves, to get the warning out early, and to treat extreme heat as the emergency it is. Other cities studied Chicago and built their own plans. Much of the modern approach to heat safety grew from the effort to make sure that particular disaster would not repeat. The reason the story matters so much now is that the same conditions have returned, only more often. The heat wave of this summer carried the same signature: a stubborn dome, high humidity, and above all the warm nights that gave no recovery. The people most at risk were the same: older adults, the isolated, those without cooling, dying not in the sun but in homes that never cooled. Chicago proved that the overnight low is the number that decides a heatwave's death toll. 30 years later, with nights warming across the country, that lesson is more relevant than ever. And it is not only an American story. In the same summer as this heatwave, the same pattern was killing people by the thousands across an ocean, in a part of the world even less prepared for it. That parallel event, unfolding across Europe, is where we look next. While the United States baked under its dome, Europe was living through its own brutal summer, and the toll there was far heavier. In the same season as the American heatwave, a series of heat waves swept across the European continent, and the early estimates of the dead ran into the thousands. It is a stark illustration of what warm nights and extreme heat can do to a place that is not built to handle them. The numbers coming out of Europe were sobering. Scientists making preliminary estimates suggested the heat there may have been linked to somewhere between 15,000 and 25,000 excess deaths across the continent. Individual countries reported their own tolls. France counted around 2,000 excess deaths in June alone. Spain attributed more than 1,000 deaths to the heat in one of its hottest Junes ever. Germany saw an estimated 5,000 excess deaths in a late June heatwave. These are preliminary figures, and they may shift as the data firms up, but the scale is clear. The heat set records across the continent. France recorded its hottest day ever measured. The United Kingdom and Switzerland logged their hottest June days on record. The heat was so intense and so early that it caught many places off guard, arriving in late spring and returning again and again through the summer. The reason Europe suffers so badly from heat comes down to how it is built and how it lives. The continent has more heat deaths per person than any other part of the world. A large part of that is the near absence of air conditioning. In much of Europe, homes and even many public buildings simply do not have it. For most of history, they did not need it. The old housing was designed for cooler summers, and the culture never adopted cooling the way hotter countries did. That gap has become deadly as the heat has intensified, and it has sparked a real argument within Europe about whether to change. In France especially, air conditioning is often viewed with suspicion, seen by some as a poor adaptation to a warming climate, or even as a kind of decadence. There is a widespread cultural wariness of the temperature shock of moving between hot outdoor air and cold indoor air, a belief that it can make a person ill. So even as the heat kills thousands, many resist the one technology that most reliably prevents heat deaths. The heat wave of this summer pushed that debate into the open more than ever. The contrast with other parts of the world was not lost on observers. In China, for instance, air conditioning is so widespread that it is used even in barns to keep livestock cool. Watching Europe struggle without it, some commentators abroad found the resistance hard to understand. The debate touches on deep questions about comfort, energy use, and how societies should adapt to a hotter world, and there are reasonable views on more than one side. But the raw fact remains that where cooling is scarce, the heat kills more people. The European heat carried the same warm night signature as the American event. Across the continent, nights failed to cool, and in homes without air conditioning there was no escape after dark. The same physiology applied. The same stacking of strain across days, the same concentration of deaths among older adults and the isolated. The lesson of Chicago and the lesson of the American heatwave were being written again on a larger scale across Europe. Health authorities there did not mince words about what it meant. The World Health Organization warned that Europe's readiness for extreme heat was falling short, and that more deadly weeks could still lie ahead in the same summer. It was a direct statement that the continent was not prepared for a threat that was only going to grow. The European experience puts the American heatwave in a wider frame. This is not a local event or a single unlucky summer in one country. It is a pattern showing up across the Northern Hemisphere at once, driven by the same warming, expressed through the same warm nights, killing the same vulnerable people. The scale differs by place, shaped by how each society is built. But the underlying story is one story. That raises a hard question that both continents share. How do we even know how many people a heatwave killed, when so many of its victims die quietly and are never obviously counted? The answer lies in a method called excess mortality, and understanding it changes how you see every heat death figure in this report. That is where we turn next. Through this report, the death tolls have come with a quiet warning attached. The running count during the American heatwave stood at a couple dozen. The European estimates ran to many thousands. Those two kinds of numbers are measured in completely different ways, and understanding the difference is the key to grasping how deadly heat really is. It hides its victims better than almost any other hazard. Start with the problem. When a person dies during a heatwave, the cause written on the death certificate is often not the heat. It is a heart attack, a stroke, kidney failure, a breathing crisis. All of these can be triggered or worsened by extreme heat, but on paper they look like ordinary medical deaths. So if you only count the cases explicitly labelled as heat deaths, you capture a small fraction of the true toll. That is the number available during a heat wave, the couple dozen clear-cut cases. It is real, but it is only the visible tip. To find the rest, scientists use a method called excess mortality. The idea is simple. You look at how many people normally die in a given place during a given week of the year, based on years of records. Then you look at how many actually died during the heat wave. The difference between the two, the deaths above the normal baseline, is the excess. It captures everyone the heat killed, whether or not the heat was named on the certificate. This is how the European estimates of 15 to 25,000 were reached. No one counted that many heat-stamped death certificates. Instead, researchers compared the total deaths during the heat waves to what a normal summer would bring, and the gap was enormous. Those thousands of extra deaths, above the expected number, are the true measure of the disaster. It is also how France arrived at roughly 2,000 excess deaths in June, and Germany at around 5,000 in a single late June stretch. The method reveals something the daily headlines cannot. During a heat wave, the news reports the obvious cases as they happen. But the excess mortality analysis, which takes weeks to complete, almost always finds a toll many times larger. The quiet deaths, the older adults who died at home over a run of hot nights, the people whose weak hearts finally gave out, all show up in the excess count even though none of them made the news. This is why heat is called a silent killer. Its true toll is invisible until the statisticians go looking for it, well after the heat has passed. That delay has real consequences for how seriously heat is taken. A flood or a tornado produces immediate, countable, visible destruction. The death toll is known within days, and the public grasps the scale at once. Heat produces no wreckage. Its toll accumulates quietly, indoors, and only becomes clear weeks later in a mortality report that few people read. So heat is consistently underestimated, even though in a typical year it is the deadliest form of weather in the United States, ahead of hurricanes, floods, and tornadoes. The lag also means the full cost of this summer's heat waves is not yet known. During the event, the visible count was small. The complete picture, drawn from excess mortality, will emerge in the months ahead, as health agencies compare the summer's deaths to the baseline. History strongly suggests the final number will be far higher than the count available while the heat was happening. That is not alarm. It is simply how heat deaths have always tallied. Excess mortality also connects directly to the warm night theme. The people who show up in the excess count are overwhelmingly the ones the warm nights hit hardest. Older adults, those with chronic illness, people without cooling, the isolated. They do not die of a single dramatic exposure. They die of accumulated strain from nights that never let their bodies recover. The excess mortality method is, in a sense, the tool that finally makes the harm of the warm night visible after the fact. So when you see a small death toll during a heatwave, hold it lightly. It is the number we can see in the moment, not the number that is real. The real one comes later, and it is larger. Behind all of these deaths sits a deeper question. Why are the nights warming at all, and why faster than the days? That trend is the engine turning familiar summer heat into something more dangerous, and it is the subject of the next chapter. There is a fact underneath this entire report that deserves to be stated plainly. The nights are warming faster than the days. This is not a quirk of one heat wave. It is a measured long-term trend across the United States and much of the world, and it is the reason the warm night danger keeps growing. To understand why heat waves are getting deadlier, you have to understand why the dark hours are heating up the fastest. The evidence is well documented. The most recent National Climate Assessment, the major government report on how the climate is changing in the United States, found that nighttime temperatures are rising faster than daytime temperatures. Meteorologists tracking heat waves have watched the same thing happen, event after event. As one put it, the trend in these big heat events has been for the overnight lows to run warmer and warmer, especially during the worst of them. The floor of the night keeps climbing. The physics behind it is not complicated. As the planet warms, the atmosphere holds more heat overall. During the day, that added heat is one factor among several, competing with the powerful direct energy of the sun. At night, with the sun gone, the trapped heat becomes the dominant force. There is no sunlight to swamp it. So the extra warmth the atmosphere is holding shows up most clearly in the overnight low, which is why that number is rising the fastest. Two things in particular keep the nights warm. The first is water vapour. A warmer atmosphere holds more moisture, and moisture traps heat and slows nighttime cooling. So as the world warms and the air grows more humid, nights shed less of their heat after dark. This is the same effect seen in a single humid heat wave, now operating as a long-term climate trend. More moisture in the air, year over year, means warmer nights, year over year. The second is the general warming itself. When the daytime starts from a hotter baseline, the night that follows starts from a hotter floor too. A heat dome that forms today builds on air that is already warmer than the same dome would have found decades ago. So the whole event runs hotter, days and nights alike, and the nights in particular lose their old ability to fall into the cool 60s that once gave bodies their recovery. This trend is what turns a familiar weather pattern into a growing threat. Heat domes have always formed in summer. What has changed is that they now build on a warmer world, and they hold warmer nights. A pattern that once brought a hot but survivable week increasingly brings a dangerous one. The weather map looks the same as it always did. The consequences do not. The warming nights also help explain why heat records keep falling, not for daytime highs alone, but for overnight lows, and for the warmest low temperatures on record. Those nighttime records get little attention, because a hot night makes a less dramatic headline than a hot afternoon. But they are the records that matter most for human survival, because they measure the exact thing that decides a heatwave's death toll. For the most vulnerable people, this trend is a slow tightening of the vice. The old strategies for surviving heat without air conditioning depended on cool nights. Open the windows, run a fan, let the breeze reset the house before morning. As the nights warm, those strategies fail more often. What worked for a grandparent's generation no longer works, not because people are less resourceful, but because the night air itself has changed. The free defense is being taken away. It is worth being precise about what this trend does and does not mean. It does not mean every night is hot, or that cool nights are gone. It means that the average night is warmer than it used to be, that the warmest nights are getting warmer, and that during heat waves the overnight lows are running higher than they once did. That shift, modest as it sounds, is enough to move a heat wave from uncomfortable toward deadly, because the human body lives right at the edge where a few degrees overnight decides whether it recovers. This heat wave, then, is not a freak. It is a clear example of a pattern that is becoming more common, and this particular summer had an extra ingredient that tilted the odds toward heat even further, a shift in the great ocean and atmosphere pattern that governs so much of the world's weather. That ingredient, El Niño, is the subject of the next chapter. Every heat wave has a local cause, the dome overhead. But some summers are simply more prone to heat than others, because of a much larger pattern that shifts the odds across the whole planet. This summer was one of those. A powerful El Niño had taken hold, and it helped load the dice toward a hotter, more stubborn heat. El Niño is a natural pattern centered in the tropical Pacific Ocean. Every few years, the surface waters across a vast stretch of that ocean grow warmer than usual. That warmth is not confined to the Pacific. A patch of ocean that large, heated up, releases enormous amounts of heat and moisture into the atmosphere, and that changes weather patterns around the world. In broad terms, an El Niño year tends to be a warmer year globally, and it tips the odds toward more heat waves. In the middle of June, before this heat wave struck, the National Weather Service confirmed that El Niño conditions were present, and raised the possibility that it could strengthen into what forecasters informally call a Super El Niño, an especially strong version of the pattern. Climate scientists had already flagged what that would likely mean. With El Niño conditions in place, they expected higher temperatures and a greater likelihood of heat waves through the year. The heat wave that followed fit the forecast. It is important to be careful about cause here, and to say it plainly. El Niño did not create this heat dome by itself. Heat domes form on their own, from the ordinary buckling of the jet stream in any summer. What El Niño does is shift the background conditions, making the whole atmosphere run a little warmer, so that when a dome does form, it builds on hotter ground and can push to more extreme numbers. It stacks the odds. It does not deal the specific hand. There is a second, larger force at work alongside El Niño, and the two combine. Human-caused climate change has raised the baseline temperature of the entire planet. El Niño is a temporary natural swing on top of that baseline. When a strong El Niño lands in an already warmed world, the two add together, and the result can be record-breaking global heat. Scientists studying this heat wave concluded that the extreme heat dome over eastern Canada and the United States would have been virtually impossible without the warming driven by fossil fuels. The natural pattern set the stage, but the long-term warming is what pushed it to records. This pairing helps explain why so many places, on more than one continent, baked in the same season. El Niño operates globally, nudging the odds toward heat everywhere at once. Layered on the warming baseline, it produced a summer in which the United States, Canada, and Europe all suffered severe heat in overlapping weeks. These were not entirely separate events. They shared a common background, a warmer world in an El Niño year. For the warm night theme, El Niño matters because it lifts the floor. A warmer global baseline, boosted by El Niño, means that overnight lows during any heat wave start higher than they otherwise would. The same dome, in a neutral year, might have allowed the nights to fall a few degrees further. In this El Niño summer, on top of the long-term warming, the nights held higher, and the recovery window narrowed further still. Understanding El Niño also offers a small measure of forecasting power. Because the pattern develops over months and can be tracked, scientists can see an El Niño coming and warn that the season ahead is likely to run hot. That advance notice is valuable. It lets health agencies and cities prepare, stock cooling centres, and get ahead of the danger before the first dome forms. The heat is not fully predictable, but the tilt of the odds can be seen in advance. El Niño will not last forever. These patterns swing back and forth, and eventually the Pacific will cool again into a different phase, which tends to ease the global heat somewhat. But the underlying warming does not swing back. It stays, and slowly grows. So even after this El Niño fades, the baseline it sat upon will remain, and the next strong El Niño will build on a baseline higher still. That is the large-scale setup behind this summer's heat. Now, the report turns back to the human scale, and to one of the most personal costs of the warm nights, the thing they quietly steal from nearly everyone caught under them: sleep. That quiet casualty is the subject of the next chapter. Not everyone under this heat wave ended up in a hospital, but almost everyone under it lost something quieter and nearly universal: sleep. The warm nights that endangered the vulnerable also robbed millions of ordinary people of rest, and that lost sleep carries its own slow costs, for the body and the mind alike. The body is built to sleep in the cool. As night falls, a healthy body lowers its own core temperature slightly, and that small drop is part of what allows deep, restful sleep. The process depends on being able to shed heat to a cooler environment. When the bedroom stays near 80 degrees all night, the body cannot lower its temperature the way it needs to. Sleep comes harder, breaks more often, and stays shallower. A person tosses, wakes, throws off the covers, and never sinks into the deep rest that restores them. Anyone who lived through this heat wave without strong cooling knows the feeling. The sleepless, sweaty nights with a fan running full blast and no relief. It is exhausting and miserable, and it is easy to treat as a mere annoyance. But repeated night after night, lost sleep is more than an annoyance. It wears the body and mind down in ways that compound, much as the heat strain itself does. Research on nighttime heat has found real consequences. When summer nights are too warm for good sleep, the disruption reaches beyond feeling tired. Poor sleep over time is linked to a weakened immune system, so the body fights off illness less well. It is tied to worse mental health, including higher rates of anxiety and low mood, and it raises the risk of cardiovascular disease and other chronic conditions. Sleep is when the body repairs itself, and a run of hot nights interrupts that repair for everyone, not only the most vulnerable. The mental toll deserves its own mention. Sleep loss frays a person's mood, patience, and judgment. After several bad nights, people are more irritable, less able to concentrate, and slower to make good decisions. On a large scale, when a whole city loses sleep for a week, you see the effects ripple outward, in frayed tempers and diminished focus. It is one reason long heat waves feel so grinding. The heat is not only uncomfortable during the day, it is stealing the rest that would let people cope with it. There is a compounding loop here that ties directly to the danger this report has traced. Poor sleep makes the body less able to handle heat the next day. A well-rested body regulates its temperature better and tolerates strain more easily. A sleep-deprived body is already frayed, its defences lower, its judgment duller. So the warm night does double damage. It denies the body its physical recovery from the heat, and it denies it the restorative sleep that would help it face the next day. Each poor night makes the next hot day harder to survive. For the most vulnerable, this loop can be the mechanism of harm itself. An older adult who cannot sleep in a hot bedroom grows more exhausted and more confused each day. That confusion can keep them from recognizing their own danger, from drinking enough water, from seeking cooler air. The lost sleep is not just a symptom of the heat. It becomes part of how the heat overwhelms them. The sleep cost also reaches people who are in no medical danger at all, which is part of why it matters so widely. A healthy worker who sleeps badly for a week is not going to the hospital, but they are more tired, less safe on the job, more prone to mistakes, and less able to care for others who depend on them. A city full of exhausted people is a city that functions a little worse, with more accidents and more strain, all traceable to nights that would not cool. Recognizing sleep as a casualty of heat changes how we should think about the overnight low. It is not only a matter of who lives and who dies, though it is that. It is also a matter of the rest, health, and steadiness of everyone caught underneath. The warm night touches the vulnerable most severely, but it touches nearly everyone. There is one group for whom the heat allows no escape at all, day or night, because their work keeps them out in it. The people who labour outdoors carry the heaviest and most direct exposure of anyone, and they deserve a close look. That is where the report turns next. For most people, surviving a heat wave means limiting time in the worst of it. Stay inside during the peak, find shade, wait for the cooler hours. But there is a large group for whom that advice is nearly impossible to follow, because their work requires them to be out in the heat for hours at a stretch. Outdoor workers face the most direct and sustained exposure of anyone, and during this heat wave they were among the most at risk. Construction workers frame the problem clearly. Their work is physically hard, which means their own bodies generate significant heat on top of the weather. It often happens on open sites with little shade, on surfaces like concrete and metal that soak up and radiate the sun, and it cannot always pause when the heat index hits 110, because projects run on schedules and workers run on paychecks. A roofer on a dark roof in the afternoon sun is enduring conditions far more extreme than the official air temperature suggests. Farm workers face the same exposure across long days in open fields. Agricultural work bends the body under the direct sun for hours, frequently far from air conditioning, sometimes far from easy access to water or shade. Many farm workers are paid by the amount they harvest, which pushes them to keep working through dangerous heat rather than rest. And a heat wave does not only threaten the workers, it stresses the crops and the livestock they tend, which is a further cost, though the human danger comes first. The list of exposed workers runs long. Delivery drivers moving in and out of hot trucks, landscapers and grounds crews, warehouse workers in buildings without cooling, road crews standing over fresh asphalt. Anyone whose job keeps them outdoors or in unair-conditioned spaces carries a heightened risk, and together these workers number in the millions. The early death in this heat wave, the 68-year-old man in Pennsylvania, came while he was doing outdoor work, trimming bushes in temperatures past 100 degrees. That is the pattern in miniature. The warm nights reach these workers too, and in a particularly harsh way. An outdoor worker who spends the day straining in extreme heat needs the night to recover more than almost anyone. Their bodies have been working hard, banking heat stress all day. If they then go home to a residence that does not cool, they get no recovery before returning to the same brutal conditions the next morning. The stacking of strain that endangers a sedentary older adult is even steeper for someone doing hard physical labour in the sun by day and sleeping in the heat by night. The guidance for protecting outdoor workers is well established and worth stating plainly, because it saves lives. Water, rest and shade are the core of it. Workers in the heat should drink water frequently, before they feel thirsty, since thirst lags behind the body's real need. They should take regular breaks in the shade or in air conditioning to let the body shed heat. And they need genuine access to shade, not just permission to rest, but a real cool place to do it. When the heat is extreme, the safest approach is to shift the hardest work to the cooler morning hours and to slow the pace during the peak. Just as important is watching out for one another. Heat illness can come on fast, and a person in its grip may not recognise it, because the heat itself clouds their judgment. So workers are urged to watch their co-workers for the warning signs, the confusion, the stumbling, the person who stops sweating or suddenly seems unwell. Catching heat illness early in a co-worker and getting them cooled down quickly can be the difference between a scare and a death. New workers who are not yet used to the heat are at special risk, because the body needs time to adjust to working in extreme temperatures. The exposure of outdoor workers also raises a matter of fairness that sits under this whole report. The people who most need protection from heat are often those with the least power to protect themselves. A worker who cannot afford to lose a day's pay, who cannot set their own schedule, is caught between the danger of the heat and the pressure to keep working. The heat, once again, falls heaviest on those with the fewest ways to escape it. Facing a threat this widespread, cities and communities are not standing still. A growing set of efforts aims to blunt the danger of extreme heat, from immediate shelter to long-term change. What cities are trying, and what actually helps, is the subject of the next chapter. Faced with heat waves that keep arriving hotter and with warmer nights, cities are not helpless, and many are beginning to act. The response is uneven, and much of it is still young, but a real toolkit is taking shape. Some of it offers immediate shelter during a heat wave. Some of it slowly reshapes a city to be cooler for good. Both matter, and both trace directly back to the lessons this report has laid out. The most immediate tool is the cooling centre. During a heat wave, cities open public buildings with air conditioning, libraries, community centres and other spaces where anyone can come to escape the heat for a few hours at no cost. For a person without cooling at home, these centres can be life-saving. Cities publicise their locations, and some arrange transportation to help those who cannot get there on their own. The limitation, noted earlier, is that most close at night, when the danger peaks. A few places have begun experimenting with overnight cooling options to close that gap, precisely because the warm night is where the harm concentrates. A newer idea is to give heat the kind of organised response that storms have long had. Some cities have appointed a chief heat officer, a single official responsible for coordinating the city's response to extreme heat, from opening cooling centres to planning long-term changes. The idea is to treat heat as the serious, deadly hazard it is, with someone whose job is to see the whole problem and marshal a response. It is a recognition that heat, long overlooked because it kills so quietly, needs dedicated attention. Related to that is the effort to name and rank heat waves, the way we name hurricanes. Some places have begun categorizing heat waves by severity, and in a few cases giving them names. The reasoning is rooted in the core problem this report keeps returning to. Heat is underestimated because it is invisible and undramatic. Giving a heat wave a name and a category makes it feel real and serious, helps the public grasp the danger, and prompts people to take protective action. A named, ranked heat wave is harder to shrug off than a vague stretch of hot days. Beyond the immediate response, cities are working to cool themselves over the long term by attacking the urban heat island directly. The single most effective tool is trees. A well-shaded street can be dramatically cooler than a bare one, and a robust tree canopy cools a whole neighbourhood, both by shading surfaces and by releasing water vapour into the air. Cities are planting trees, with special attention to the hotter, less green neighbourhoods that need them most. Because those neighbourhoods are often also the poorer ones, this work doubles as an effort to close the unequal geography of heat. Cities are also changing their surfaces. Dark roofs and dark pavements soak up heat and feed the battery effect that keeps nights warm. Lighter coloured, reflective roofs and pavements bounce more sunlight away, so they store less heat during the day and release less at night. Some cities are requiring or encouraging cool roofs on new buildings and repainting streets and rooftops in reflective coatings. These changes are modest one by one, but across a whole city they can measurably lower temperatures, including the overnight lows that matter most. Preparation before the heat arrives is another growing focus. Because a strong El Niño can be seen coming months ahead, and because heat waves themselves are forecast days out, cities have time to get ready. That means heat action plans that spell out who does what, systems to warn the public early, and outreach to check on vulnerable residents before and during the worst of it. This last piece, the organised checking on isolated older adults, comes straight from the Chicago disaster, where isolation proved deadly. Turning that lesson into a standing system is one of the clearest ways a city can save lives. None of these efforts is a complete answer, and it is honest to say so. Cooling centres close at night. Trees take years to grow. Reflective surfaces help but do not erase the heat. The changes cost money and time, and they are spread unevenly across cities that have very different resources. The threat is growing faster in some places than the response can keep up. But the direction is right, and the tools are real. Each one chips away at a piece of the danger this report has traced. City-scale action matters, but it works slowly, over seasons and years. For the person living through a heatwave right now, with a warm night ahead, the question is more immediate. What can one person actually do tonight to stay safe? That practical guidance is the subject of the next chapter. City plans and long-term change matter, but on a hot night none of that helps the person lying awake in an 80-degree bedroom. So this chapter is practical. It gathers the standard, official guidance for getting through a heatwave safely, built around the problem this whole report has centred on, the warm night. None of it is complicated, and all of it is worth knowing before the heat arrives. Start with the home during the day, because how you manage the day shapes the night. The advice from energy and health officials is to cool the home earlier, before the peak heat hits, and then work to keep that cool in. Close blinds and curtains against the sun, especially on windows the sun hits directly. If you have air conditioning, a common recommendation is to set it around 78 degrees, cool enough for safety without straining the grid or the budget too hard. Holding off on heat-producing appliances like the oven and the dryer until the cooler hours also helps keep the home from heating up. For the night itself, the goal is to protect your sleep and your body's recovery. If you have air conditioning, the bedroom is the room that matters most, since that is where you spend the vulnerable overnight hours. If you do not have air conditioning, and the old trick of opening the windows no longer works because the night air is too warm, the standard advice shifts toward the body directly. A cool shower before bed lowers your body temperature. A damp cloth on the skin, or a fan positioned to move air across you, helps sweat evaporate. Sleeping in the lowest, coolest part of the home helps, since heat rises. Hydration runs through all of it. The guidance is to drink water regularly, throughout the day and even at night, rather than waiting until you feel thirsty, because in extreme heat, thirst lags behind what the body actually needs. This matters especially for older adults, whose sense of thirst is weaker. Steady water, not a rush of it all at once, is the aim. During the hottest part of the day, the core advice is simple. Limit time outdoors, and if you must be out, take frequent breaks in shade or air conditioning. Save hard physical activity for the cooler morning or evening. If your own home cannot stay safe, know where the nearest cooling centre is, or plan to spend the peak hours somewhere with air conditioning. A library, a store, the home of a friend or relative who has cooling. Spending even part of the day in a cool place gives the body a real break, even if the night at home stays warm. A few specific dangers deserve their own mention, because they cause needless deaths every summer. Never leave a child or a pet in a parked car, not even for a few minutes, not even with the windows cracked. The inside of a car heats to lethal temperatures with shocking speed. And take the warning signs of heat illness seriously, in yourself and others. Heavy sweating, weakness, dizziness, nausea, a rapid pulse, or a headache signal heat exhaustion, and the response is to get to a cooler place, rest, and drink water. Confusion, a very high body temperature, or skin that has gone hot and dry can signal heat stroke, which is an emergency that needs immediate medical help and rapid cooling while help is on the way. The single most valuable thing many people can do costs nothing. Check on others. The people most at risk from a warm night, older adults living alone, neighbours with chronic illness, those without cooling, are often the least able to ask for help or to recognise their own danger. A knock on the door, a phone call, a few minutes of attention can catch trouble before it turns fatal. The lesson from Chicago, written in hundreds of lonely deaths, is that isolation kills in a heatwave and connection saves. That is as true for one caring neighbour as it is for a citywide programme. This guidance is calm on purpose, because heat rewards preparation over panic. The dangers are real, but they are also, for most people, manageable with a few sensible steps taken in time. Cool the home, protect the night, drink water, avoid the worst of the sun, know where to go if the home fails, and watch out for the vulnerable around you. Those simple habits are what stand between a hard heatwave and a deadly one. With the practical steps in hand, the report turns to what lies ahead, because this heatwave and this summer are not finished. What the coming weeks may bring is the subject of the next chapter. A heatwave ends, but the season does not. As this particular dome finally weakened and slid off to the east, the temptation was to treat the danger as past. The evidence pointed the other way. Both the forecasts and the experts warned that more heat was coming, and that the summer still had deadly weeks in it. Understanding what lies ahead is part of taking this event seriously. The clearest warning came from Europe, where health authorities were blunt. The World Health Organization stated that more deadly weeks may still lie ahead for the region, even as one heat wave eased. Forecasters there were already tracking the next surge of heat building over the Atlantic, with Portugal and southern Spain forecast to climb toward the range of 109 degrees, and France and neighbouring countries bracing for another round. The pattern that had already killed thousands was not finished. It was reloading. The same reality applies more broadly. A single heat dome breaking down does not end the conditions that produced it. The El Niño that helped tilt this summer toward heat was still in place, still nudging the odds toward more heat waves. The warm background of a heated planet had not cooled, so the ingredients that made this event remained available for the next one. Through the rest of the summer, more domes were likely to form, and each would build on the same warm ground with the same warm nights. There is a particular danger in how people respond to a break in the heat. When a heat wave ends and a cooler stretch arrives, there is a natural sense of relief, a feeling that the threat has passed. But if another heat wave follows a week or two later, that relief can turn into a letting down of guard. People who prepared carefully for the first event may not brace as hard for the second. Yet the body's vulnerability has not changed, and a later heat wave in a long summer can be just as dangerous as an earlier one. Sometimes more so because the strain of the whole season accumulates. The forecasting tools give real warning, and that is worth holding on to. Heat waves are among the more predictable dangerous weather events. A dome's formation can often be seen several days out, and the broader tilt of the season, shaped by El Niño, is known months ahead. This means the next heat wave will not arrive as a surprise. There will be time to open cooling centres, to warn the public, to check on the vulnerable, and for individuals to prepare their homes. The warning system works if people heed it. What to watch for is straightforward. Pay attention to heat alerts from official forecasters, and note not only the daytime highs but the overnight lows, which this report has shown to be the number that decides the danger. Watch the heat index, the felt temperature, rather than the air temperature alone, and watch the duration. A 3 or 4 day heat wave with warm nights is far more dangerous than a single hot day, because of the way the strain stacks. A forecast that shows several hot days in a row with little overnight relief is the one to take most seriously. The longer view is sobering but should be stated calmly, because it is simply the truth of the trend. As the planet continues to warm, heat waves like this one are expected to grow more frequent, more intense, and longer lasting, with the nights warming fastest of all. This summer's events, on multiple continents, are consistent with that trajectory. They are not a strange isolated season. They are a preview of a pattern that is becoming more common. That is not said to alarm but to prepare, because a threat understood in advance is a threat that can be met. For now, the immediate task is to get through the rest of this summer safely, treating each new heat wave with the same care as the last, and not letting a cool week erode readiness for a hot one. The tools are known, the guidance is clear, the warning systems work. What remains is to use them, again and again, for as long as the season lasts. That brings this report to its close, and back to where it began, with the one event and the single quiet fact at its centre. The final chapter returns to the heat that would not let go. We began with a dome of high pressure settling over the country in the last days of June, and we end with it gone, drifted off to the east, the immediate heat broken. But the story it told is worth holding on to, because it revealed something about heat that is easy to miss and important to remember. The danger was never only in the height of the afternoon, it was in the night that would not cool. What is known can be stated plainly. A strong, stubborn heat dome parked over the central and eastern United States and peaked over the 4th of July 2026, driving the temperature to 106 degrees in Atlantic City and putting more than 160 million people under heat alerts. The afternoons broke records across the country. But the overnight lows, stalling in the high 70s and low 80s, are what gave the heat its edge, because they denied people the recovery the body depends on. The heat stacked, night after night, and it fell hardest on older adults, the isolated, the ill, and those without a way to cool their homes. What remains uncertain is the full human cost, and that uncertainty is itself part of the story. The death toll counted during the event, a couple dozen clear cases, is only the visible tip. The true number, drawn later from excess mortality, will almost certainly be far higher, gathered from the quiet deaths in homes that never cooled. That full account will come in the weeks and months ahead, as health agencies compare this summer's deaths to a normal year. It is the nature of heat to hide its toll until after it has passed. The next thing to watch is the rest of the season. This dome was not the last. More heat was building even as this one faded, in a summer tilted toward heat by a strong El Niño sitting atop a warming world. The guidance for the weeks ahead is the same as it was for this event. Watch the overnight lows, not just the daytime highs. Take a run of hot days more seriously than a single one. Cool the home, protect the night, drink water, and check on the people around you who cannot easily check on themselves. The deepest lesson of this heat wave is the one it shares with Chicago 3 decades ago, and with Europe in the same summer, and with every warm night heat wave that has quietly killed. Heat does not need to be dramatic to be deadly. It does its worst work in silence, indoors, over a series of nights, in bodies that slowly lose the ability to keep up. The afternoon high is the part everyone watches. The overnight low is the part that decides who lives. That is the single fact this report has circled from the beginning, and it is the one worth carrying away. There is reason for steadiness rather than fear. Heat is among the most predictable of dangerous weather. It can be forecast days ahead, its seasonal tilt known months in advance. The steps that protect people are simple, well understood, and within reach of most. Cities are beginning to treat heat with the seriousness it deserves, and each named heat wave, each cooling centre, each planted tree, each neighbour checked on, chips away at the danger. The threat is growing, but so is our understanding of how to meet it. So the heat that would not let go has finally let go for now. The nights are cooling again, the recovery window is reopened, and the immediate emergency is eased. But the pattern behind it remains, and it will return most likely warmer and longer next time, with the nights leading the way. Knowing that is not cause for alarm, it is cause for readiness. The more clearly we understand that a heatwave's real weight lies in its nights, the better we can prepare for the ones still to come. We will keep watching the patterns as they build, and we will be here to walk through the next one calmly and clearly when it arrives. Until then, stay cool, look after one another, and pay attention to the quiet hours after dark. That is where this kind of danger lives, and that is where it can be met